Welcome to the Hawkeye Sidekick podcast. And you're very welcome back to the Hawkeye Sidekick hurling podcast with your host Mark Kennedy, joined again this week by Kieran Collins. Kieran, how are things?
Very good, Mark. Yourself?
I'm good, thank you. Rory's away this week. Probably represent from the Clare side of the house in this week's episode. I suppose Kieran will have a look back at last weekend's epic All Ireland Senior Hurling semi-final fixtures. Get your reaction, Kieran, on the news that Henry Shefflin is the new Kilkenny Senior Hurling manager, and maybe get a few thoughts from you in terms of the All Ireland final. I know we'll have a big preview night next week. I suppose maybe we start with Kilkenny, will we, Kieran? I mean, There was speculation there in terms of who might be getting the job, but the white smoke appeared in Kilkenny early this week. Henry Shefflin has been the chosen son, is back in Kilkenny. I suppose, get your thoughts.
Yeah, I suppose, look, there's been a lot of talk about this post in recent weeks. I suppose there was a good few in-house names that were mentioned. I suppose, Brian Dowling, who did a superb job in Kildare. He left with a bit of money, I suppose, with Galway. Look at Rise bringing, I suppose, manager Martin. I suppose he's had. I suppose David Hurley has been announced as being, I suppose he's had a good couple of years of experience now. I suppose his recent role with Tipperary, so he'll bring a vast bit of experience. Look, there's other names mentioned for the backroom team. I suppose until they're announced, we'll wait and see. But I think for Kilkenny, like, you're looking at the past few years, there's very little, a little small amount of young players have come into the team. They won that under 20 All Ireland a couple of years ago with Derek as manager, and they haven't really blooded anyone to that team. I think Billy Drennan was the star under 20 player at the time. I think they thought he was the replacement for TJ, I suppose, on the freeze and such. But I suppose this year, I don't think I've seen him play. Like, he has played a big part, over the 2 years before that. But I think that's the biggest struggle is finding, finding hurlers. TJ's at the age where you be questioning, will he go again? I think for me, Adrian Mullen is a star talent, but he struggled with injury in the last couple of years. Owen Cody, a little bit hot and cold in games. There was a lot of talk about Fiona McAsey 2 years ago. Didn't really have a massive part this year. So they have been relying on the same batch of hurlers for the last couple of years, and I think that's the biggest job that's going to face Henry is, trying to unearth youth. It's probably going to be a bit of a project. I'm sure just his name himself will bring a bit of passion to the jersey again, but he has a tough job ahead of him.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with you there, Kieran. I think it's certainly a rebuild, team in transition, whatever you want to call it, but I think if Henry wants to set the solid foundations, like, he's going to have to be given at least 3 years here to build the program up again, because I think the key decisions here, Kieran, is in terms of what senior players he retains next season. I think he has to really commit to youth here, and with David Herity and whoever the backroom staff is, need to scour the depth and breadth of Kilkenny for the young talent coming through. I'm thinking of likes of Harry Shine, Ed McDermott, looking at any other kind of sleepers in the senior, intermediate, junior hurling championships that could contribute nicely to this Kilkenny side. I think everyone's got to be required. I just wonder as well, like, see, Hugh Lawler, Billy Ryan didn't commit last year. I wonder if Henry Shefflin gives them a phone call, whether they will maybe consider coming back into the fold, because certainly this season, Kieran, like Mikey Carey, like, sacrificed his position, went to the full back line with mixed results. So I think certainly for Henry, it's probably a natural appointment. I suppose there was some probably in Kilkenny that were probably eyeing up Eddie Brennan to a certain extent, being in that backroom staff with Derek Ling. But I suppose the Kilkenny County Board have really kind of identified Pat Gilroy. They had a managerial committee. They've come up with the name. So I think it will be interesting times with Kilkenny, particularly when we hear the squad announcements probably towards the latter end of this year.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. Yeah. As I said earlier, it's the backroom team is the most important, and getting that as strong as he can. There will be, I suppose, a lot of hard decisions to be made, going into next season of, who plays on from the last couple of years. It is going to be a tough job. I don't think it's going to be All Ireland contenders at all in the next couple of years, but I suppose it's a rebuild really, and I suppose there's no better man at the helm for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe he's learned a few lessons, particularly from the Galway role as well. Being based here in Galway, his first year went relatively good. The All Ireland semi final was a massive disappointment here against Limerick. Thought composure maybe on the sideline from Henry Shefflin left him a little bit, particularly after 25 minutes when the game kind of turned. So I'd be interested just to see how Henry has evolved in terms of his managerial in-game play. But it's an interesting appointment. I know the Kilkenny people will get behind this appointment for sure. But again, I think there's an awful lot of hard work required. And I think the psychology of Kilkenny being the Leinster kingpin is definitely undermined after this year. So you can see the likes of, well, all the Leinster teams really having a good go against Kilkenny this next season in any competition. I suppose we wish Henry well anyway, and David Herity, and it'll be interesting, as we said, Kieran, in terms of the backroom staff that he does name here as well. So we'll keep that posted. I suppose after that, Kieran, we'll maybe look at the All Ireland hurling semi-finals last weekend in Dublin, Croke Park. First game, chronological order, was a fascinating tie between Galway and Cork. And to be fair to Rory, who's not on tonight, he had really flagged this as, if you want to call it a potential upset, that this was the one. And by God, he was spot on. I mean, I had my reservations heading in with Galway, but to a man, Kieran, very impressive performance, beating pretty much a shell-shocked Cork side 226 to 118. I suppose get your reaction to the Galway performance first.
Yeah, I suppose, look, they got off to a blistering start. Cork looked all over the place, really, but just, I suppose, just their pace, Cork couldn't deal with it. But look, Cork got back into it. There was a point where Galway had that, was a 6-point lead. Cork reeled off 1-4 without reply. They had a 5-point lead themselves approaching half time. And now the worrying thing for them is this is the second game in a row where they were leading approaching half time. Galway then scored 5 of the last 6 points of the half to reel in that lead. So I think that was a huge part of Galway's win, was that 5 or 7 minute period before half time. You'd look at the Munster final and you said that was probably the winning of the game for Limerick, was that period before half time where Cork had a lead. Limerick scored, I think, 3 or 4 points on the bounce to close it back in. So instead of being a 6-point game, now it's only a 1 or 2 point game. But from the restart, Galway were just, they were the better team. Cork looked, the 6s and 7s, they just couldn't deal with them. In ways, you feel sorry for Cork because there obviously was scar tissue from last year. They scored 5 points in the whole second half. Galway subs timing was very, very good. Like, you're bringing on a Conor Cooney, who I'm sure is hungry to start, like everyone else on the bench, but I thought he was really, really impressive. You're bringing on experience with Cooney. I think Brian Kilcannon coming on again, huge experience gained over the years in a Galway shirt. Like the younger lads, I think you have to be really, really impressed all year with them. I think Young Rabbit really stood up, really fronted up, and he's playing a really tough role. He's at times the only forward inside, and for a young lad to be able to play that role, it's really admirable. Like, Nyland, I think, probably didn't have his best day in play. Conor Whelan, really, really good. Tom Monaghan, for the last couple of games is like he's in hurler of the year territory. Like, if Galway were to win this All Ireland, I think he's probably one of the Galway names who's up there. I think Galway, they just took off where they left off in the second half. I think until that goal went in, Cooney's goal, is when the sigh of relief came from the sideline that we've done it, we've beaten them. From a Cork point of view, look, really impressed. Brian Hayes was near unmarkable in that first half. Cahalane just couldn't keep into it all. He was just really, really good player. And I think for me, looking at Cork, you probably question the starting team. I think William Buckley and Barry Walsh, but I think William Buckley more so has to feel really, unlucky not to be starting that starting team. I think he's done enough all year to warrant a starting place. Like, you look at the form of Alan Connolly, who has struggled all year. There's no point saying he hasn't. He's been really, really good in the freeze, but from play, he's rarely contributed over the last couple of games. I think Barry Walsh, he has shown really, really good signs for him to be on the bench. And I think in that period in the second half before the Cooney goal, like, there was only a couple of points in it. I think that game was screaming out for Shamie Harnedy. They were lacking. They just couldn't win ball there. And I think that he came on in the Munster final, and he's just that man you need in the half forward line. I think the likes of Dalton is missing there as well, where he hasn't played this year. Just a natural ball winner. And I think Cork lacked that. And aside from a ball winner, it was leaders. I think Cork really just lacked leadership in the second half. That game was still there midway through the second half. Galway were really impressive, but there was only a couple of points in at any stage. And not once at any stage did someone stand up, win a ball, win a puck out, or score a long range free or a long range point and get the crowd behind them. And I think when Cork do look back at it, it's what they'll probably may look at is a real lack of leadership there. You look at other teams, you look at Clare, like Tony Kelly, Peter Duggan, died with their boots on. You look at Limerick, I think Gerard Hegarty, Darren Burns, these players are on the day when things aren't going your way, they step up. And I think from a Cork point of view, no one stepped up. And look at, I'm sure from last year there has to be scar tissue. And unfortunately, after this game, it's not going to get any better. Like, if they do get back to Croke Park there this year, mentally, there's a fair bit to deal with there. There is a lot of pressure on them. Number one, I suppose, internally from the fan base and probably on themselves, with the record of having won All Ireland 21 years. But it's the mentally how to deal with come back into Croke Park again next year after two non-displays in the second half of games. I saw a stat there: last year's All Ireland final, this year's Munster final, and the semi-final against Galway. They only scored 113 in the 3 games in the second half of the games. So I think that is a stat of concern. Why, I don't know, but it's, I see the county board have ordered a full review of hurling in the county. Maybe a little bit of an overreaction, but they are a super team. They definitely are still probably the top 3. They are one of the top 3 teams in the country. But there's something lacking there that is holding them back.
Look, we can talk about Cork in a few minutes, but from my perspective, from Galway, I thought it mirrored 2017 in terms of the work rate, particularly around the middle third. I was at Croke Park myself, went up, and to be fair to a man, we'd asked in the podcast last week for every Galway player to empty the tank. That certainly happened, and I think Galway management have to be applauded. I thought the switch of Gavin Lee into that middle third was inspired. Thought the Cambridge native just had a super game and really did help out Dahi Burke, particularly in that kind of tricky opening half. And also Killian Trayers as well, was assigned the man-marking job of Brian Hayes. Because, Dahi Burke, quite clearly, the knee is completely troubling him. But, fair play to Dahi Burke for staying on a pitch here. But I think players, you talked about leadership. I think we saw an abundance there with those 2 sentences. Trayers, a young guy, very impressive player from Clare Galway, Turlockmore area, summons the leadership role to basically mark Brian Hayes. And also you have Gavin Lee, who's been in this setup for a few years now, had his opportunity, restaked his claim. I think Galway guys emptied the tank. But for me, Kieran, Cathal Mannion has to be in the reckoning for Hurler of the Year as well. I think he's evolving the sweeper role in such an extent that I think he's become the modern day kind of quintessential kind of quarterback from hurling. The best compliment I can give Cathal Mannion, it's almost like seeing a Declan Hannon, but he's evolved even further in terms of how he positioned himself, particularly in that middle third. The way that Cork were kind of stroking the slitter side to side, it was really down to Cathal Mannion because he never stayed in the pocket. He was constantly moving, he was constantly game reading, and when he did get the ball, his accuracy the ball is just incredible. Again, it was another superb performance for Cathal Mannion and also Padraig Mannion as well. I think to a man, Kieran, I think you've nailed it there. I think the Galway leadership was just superb on the pitch. They executed the game plan, trusted what the management had basically set out, and I thought that third quarter, particularly the opening stages, they really did look Cork in the eye, and there was only one winner.
Yeah, you could go through every line. To be fair, the work rate, the speed, the hurling, like it was crisp. It was like for me, my man of the match was Ronan Glennon. I thought he was immense the whole way through. Padraig Mannion, Tom Monaghan, Rabbit, Conor Whelan has really found a bit of form again. Cathal Mannion, while I'd like to see him closer to the goal. Yeah, I do agree. He does play that role very, very well. To have the scorers from distance. It's probably Galway were always blessed with good hurlers, I suppose, but not every team can play the system they're playing, and not every player could play the role of young Rabbit. I think he's, for a young guy, really, really impressive. He looks like a lad who's played senior for the last 4 or 5 years. He's physique, he's just a real, I suppose, modern day athlete. He's so strong, for a young guy. He just, really, really impressive. And I think as well they are missing out a trick with. I know Rory Burke is injured, and he's a guy that's really pressed in earlier rounds. And I think for Galway, if they could, I'm not sure what his update on his injury is, but if they could get back him in for a final, he adds another dimension to that team. He's, really electric when he gets moving. But like, I look Galway, I suppose in ways the pressure was on Cork. It was a free shot for him. Still, to me, and I'm not going to run them down. I think they won Leinster. That's something they haven't done for a couple of years. There's still a little bit of an asterisk on beat probably a very poor Dublin team in the Leinster final. There was a little bit of a Cork implosion in the second half. So we still don't really know how good this team is. They're a young team. They're not going to have any fear. And I'm sure they'll relish the chance to play Limerick in an Ireland final. But I suppose for me is like there still is. We actually don't know how good they are. Yes.
Like the form line going into that game on Saturday, I really questioned the Leinster form line a little bit. Had seen him against Offaly, were a bit pedestrian for 40 minutes, then pulled away eventually. Again, the Leinster hurling final, they blew Dublin out of the water. We kind of contributed that to a Dublin underperformance. But to be fair to Galway, I just thought, they're coming into the right spot here. I think they do realise it'll be a big challenge against Limerick. It almost has remnants of 2018 about it, but in role reverse, where Galway has a young up-and-coming team against a team of Limerick who've won All Ireland medals here, who are there to be shot at. And I think Galway are probably coming in here, probably under the radar still, to a certain degree. I suppose then coming into the Cork, the one thing I'm kind of talking here, I haven't heard anyone talk about player burnout. The squad hasn't been really tested depth chart wise, even in the hurling league. You look at the 7 league games, the same individuals for Cork lining out game in, game out. They're quality players. Some of them have played 13 games intercounty this year, and I feel maybe there's not enough fuel in the tank when it comes to the business end. There's definitely been a dip in performance, particularly if you could see last year in terms of Munster hurling final against Limerick. That took out both times, obviously. But I haven't heard anyone really talk about that, because that second half wise, and I heard Liam Sheedy mention it in the Sunday game, the body language coming off at half time, like they were 5 points up and then to be reduced to 1. But still, Kieran, there was a breeze with Cork in the second half. And to be perfectly honest, just the body language seems just completely off. For, as you say, maybe the mental tissue from 12 months prior came haunting back. But I think management-wise as well, I thought defensive shape-wise, in transition, all over the shop. And again, Cork, we asked if there was a plan B here. I don't think there was either. So I think there is collective responsibility from both management and the players here to kind of really accept responsibility here and move on.
I think it's going to be a tough off-season for Ben O'Connor and his management team. There's an awful lot more questions unanswered now, I think, this year than last year. I did hear, and I wasn't probably aware of it, but the 21 All Ireland final where Cork played Limerick and Limerick beat him by, I'm going to say 16 points. It was thereabouts. 7 of the 6 defenders in midfield, 7 of 9 that played in that 21 final played on this year, played against Galway. So, does the scar tissue go back further than last year's All Ireland? Or what changes? Like if 7 of the 9, 1 to 9 or 2 to 9, 7 of them players are still there. So what changes have they really made? Okay, they have the forwards to burn, I suppose. Really, you're looking at, Robbie O'Flynn coming on, and you're looking at Barry Walsh coming on, and William Buckley, and still having Seamus Hardy in the bench. No doubt, Kieran Joyce was a huge loss to them. Going off with the cruciate earlier this year. Cork's problem seemed to be at the back. Cork would score for fun, but I think the back is where the problem is at. And I think this is where they're going to have to not rewrite the script as such, but changes I think are going to have to be made. There's certain players in there that I won't go as far to call them frauds, but I think they're such a lack of leadership. And you could see it with the body language. The heads were down, the heads dropped. They were still in the game. There was only a couple of points at any stage early in that second half in the game. But big guys in that team, Tim O'Mahony, Rob Downey, just I suppose really nowhere to be seen. He's an exceptional player, and I suppose it's something you wouldn't associate with him.
Yeah,
Darth Fitzgibbon. Even to me, even before the sending off, which I'll talk about in a second, probably was a little harsh. They didn't seem to have the fight in them, which to me is worrying. You question why, and I think that's why Ben O'Connor is going to have a long, few months ahead of him trying to work out why. I suppose first of all, there's trends in games that working up a 5-point lead coming into half time and letting it slip, very similar to than it did in the Munster final. That's a concern. That's the point where you want to go from 5 to 7 or 8 and stamp your name on the game. But I think that's where the real question marks are for Cork. Going back to Fitzgibbon, I think, look, probably by the letter of the law, yes, but I think we have to use common sense in this as well. I think there was no intent on the part of Darragh Fitzgibbon. Yes, it did make contact, but I think he was trying to hook. Can't remember who it was he hit, but he was trying to make a hook. Yes, he probably, when you're on a yellow card, you have to be really careful. And I think when you look at the likes of real head challenges that were letting go, and Darragh Fitzgibbon gets sent off for the likes of this, I think Johnny Murphy did have a good game. I wouldn't be his biggest fan. I think apart from that, he did a really, really good game. A little bit of common sense regarding it was a little flick. There wasn't much contact in it. We'll talk about other rules when we get to the other game. But I think GA definitely have to stamp out and have to take control of challenges to the head. To the lesser effect of that, I thought it was a harsh red card.
I'd agree with you there. I think definitely the second one particularly has to be a bit of common sense, but I feel Johnny Murphy was probably looking not to give it. I think there was maybe some, intervention here from the sideline, particularly from the officiating staff there, because it was right in front of them. I think that's more to follow there. I think it was pretty innocuous. But again, rule book is rule book. So unfortunately, Darragh Fitzgibbon was dismissed. And again, is it a factor? Yes, but I think Galway were well on top at that stage. And I think it's maybe a sense of panic here from a Cork perspective that, even the 2 yellow cards were just completely mistimed. It just seemed to me that Fitzgibbon, unfortunately, was a little bit rattled in terms of that. And, the game going away a little bit. But look, all in all, I think Galway, fair play to them, 13 different scores on the day. They prevented Cork. 27 scoring opportunities only Cork had on last Saturday, which, look, when you consider Cork's free-flowing scoring style, I think Micheál O'Donoghue, Franny Ford, and the management and the analysts must be extremely proud in terms of that delivery, particularly after the opening maybe 10, 12 minutes. So I think, look, Galway coming in good mood, and as you say, Cork, it's going to be a difficult winter there. I think for Ben O'Connor, what does he do here? Because he trusted this panel this year, so now it's year 2. So it's going to be very interesting to see the relationships he's built here, but certain players might be deemed surplus to requirements, which, look, I think it's going to be tough discussions here down in Leeside, particularly for the rest of the year. But again, we wish Galway well. I suppose, Kieran, we'll move on to Sunday, the Midwest El Clasico between Limerick and Clare. And look, Rory was on last week, felt, that Clare would need an awful lot of things to go right. And by hell, heading into the 70th minute last Sunday, it looked as if Clare were destined to go to an All-Ireland final before Aidan O'Connor popped up with that injury time goal. I suppose, get your thoughts here on this Limerick 121-119 win over Clare.
Clare were just exceptional in the first half. They just brought the fight. I suppose it's something we haven't really seen this year at different stages. Like when Kelly was getting booked, he was nearly frothing at the mouth. I suppose that's the level of intensity they brought. I think Limerick couldn't handle it. Just Clare all over the field they were winning every battle. And I think Limerick in ways were probably lucky that they were able to keep in on the scoreline. I suppose look, it was a game of two halves really, but like just really really impressed with Clare's start. I suppose they did keep us all guessing on the startup. I suppose when Conlon was named in the full forward line, you'd be kind of thinking, right, they're going to go sweeper. I think they kind of fooled everyone there, but to a man, I think they all fronted up. And for me, Tony Kelly and Peter Duggan were just exceptional. I think all game really, but Kelly playing in the full forward line really caused all sorts of bother. He 4 points scored, I think, in the first half. Peter Duggan on puckouts, while they did become a little bit one dimensional on them, just so strong in the air. There was one stage in the first half where he takes a puck out, fends off a challenge, knocks it over the bar from the sideline. Really, really good game. I think Limerick were just hanging on by a thread really in that first half. And I think when that penalty goes in, we'll discuss the penalty, I think, a little bit. But when that penalty goes in and it's 57 minutes on the clock and it's 190 to 16 points, you're thinking, right, this is it. It's not from a Limerick point of view, it's not our day. But I think serious character in the Limerick team, and I suppose it showed when it was needed most. I think from we'll go for Clare for a minute. I think the fact they didn't score after the penalty, that's a concern to me. I think they emptied the tank in the first half. They really worked their socks off in the first half, and the day it was a really hot day. It's hard to bring that game for 70 minutes, but they needed to tack on a couple of points from that stage, from 57 minutes. A couple of minutes injury time. You're talking nearly probably 18, 19 minutes. You need to be scoring on a lead like that. And I think when Clare look back at it, that will be the bit to be most disappointed on for Limerick. I think that they've shown battle big time over the years, but I think no more than they did on Sunday. They didn't seem to ever panic. I think that Burns got a score after the penalty, and he really got the crowd going behind him. And I think you could see Kiley driving him on as well. And I think from then, I think obviously bringing in Keane Lynch made a huge impact on the game. And I think all that combined, I think Limerick just got a little bit of a purple patch at the right time. Real sucker punch for Clare. Heading into the clock is on the red. You'd have to praise Adam English. I think another player would have tapped over the bar. We go again. But to see us was that O'Connor had got a little bit of space and to play a diagonal ball to him, real ballsy at that stage of the game. And I think from there, to be fair to Clare, that they kept fighting, and they did fight all day. But I think Limerick just shows that they never are really a beaten ticket. They never give up. I suppose they always talk about their system and they trust the system, but I think other teams, when they're in that same situation, would throw in the towel. But to be fair to Limerick, and we've been following them now a good number of years, this team hasn't. It's never thrown in the towel. There's been days that haven't been so rosy and everything hasn't gone to plan, but they'll always keep fighting. And that's one thing that has to be really commended when all this finishes and this team starts retiring, and hopefully not for another couple of years. People will talk about all they've won, but I think it'll be to talk about just the dog in the team when it's needed most. It's there.
I'll probably come from a Clare perspective with Rory not being here, but I mean the way they set up as well, Kieran, I thought was last week in the podcast, Rory and myself challenged Brian Lohan and the management to set this team up properly, and I think they did that. To be fair to John Conlon, it was an interesting switch, put him into midfield, but I really thought like his cameo for the 45 minutes that he was on was exceptional. He really did nullify Darragh O'Donovan's influence on the game. Moving Duggan to the 40 paid ultimate dividends, along with Cathal Malone as well. I thought as well he provided some good aerial dominance and platform, and that really did involve an awful lot of Limerick defensive players. And I thought there was a sense of panic in that Limerick backline, particularly opening. Like there was two phases early on, Kieran, in this game, which I was surprised. One was Sean Finn. He got the slitter kind of on his 22. looked around. The regulation pass was to his side to Nicky Quaid, but then decided to play a kind of an ambitious medium pass. Nowhere to particular went over the sideline. But then I think about maybe a minute later, Dan Morrissey is usually so reliable in possession, spots Nicky Quaid offering diagonal, and the ball is overhit by about 20 yards. And I'm kind of like, literally Clare and the supporters did sense that as well. And I think, to be fair to Limerick, for them to only go in 5 points at half time, like Clare had done all the hurling here. I mean, Tony Kelly was getting exceptional space, particularly around that 40 into the full back line. And I felt sorry for Dan Morrissey as well, because I thought the protection of him wasn't there, particularly in the first half. And I mean, for Limerick to go in 5 points down, given what all Clare had done, I think John Kiley, Paul Kinnerk would have been relatively happy going in at half time to see if they could reset things.
Not too many occasions you could say that Limerick back six have panicked, but there was clear panic. I remember that because Dan was under no real pressure, and it was a simple maybe 15-yard pass to Nicky, and he drives it over the far line. They were at 6s and 7s at times, and I think when Clare had that that intensity going, they had Limerick rattled. I think they probably needed to get more on the scoreboard. To be only going in 5 up probably wasn't a true reflection of the work Clare put into that first half. Looking at scores, Tony Kelly had a savage game, scoring 1-5. Peter Duggan scored 3. But aside from that, Ryan Taylor got 2, Cathal Malone got 1, Shane O'Donnell got 1. I think you need more impact from other players. I think Mark Rogers, who a player I really, really like, I think he's had a poor enough year on his own standards from play. He's actually settled on the freeze really, really well. But maybe, I think maybe 2 years ago we were seeing him contributing a lot more from play. You need to see that coming back into it, especially now. You're looking forward with the likes of Shane O'Donnell stepping away. He's another big hole to fill, and I think the likes of Rogers, now is the time he needs to stand up and be a top player. Tony Kelly, as I said, one of the greats, exceptional first half, scoring 4 points. But I think that 5-point lead wasn't the true reflection of Clare's dominance in that first half.
Certainly agree, Kieran. And I mean, let's get to it. It's been talked about in the media all week, really, the incident with Peter Duggan. So, look, you can say all you want about Peter Duggan and Dan Morrissey, the challenge before that. But there's a penalty rewarded for the Peter Duggan challenge from Nicky Quaid. I suppose, get your thoughts on this. Kieran, 1, obviously it was a penalty. Do you feel that should have been a black card? And maybe 2, does the rule have to be really revamped based on this incident from Nicky Quaid and Peter Duggan?
First of all, I think the rule, while the idea of the rule is brilliant, because there was an awful lot of cynical fouling in front of goal, but it does need to be revamped. And it's not just this game. There's been other games. I think you look back earlier when Waterford played Cork, Mark Fitzgerald got a black card for a pull down on Brian Hayes. And then the big talking point after was that, okay, you have to be in possession of the ball for the opposition team to receive a black card. So there's number 1. I think that in possession needs to be scrapped. If it's a clear goal, we need to remove the debate. So we've had black cards, a lot of black cards this year, especially in the league, where there's a bit of, personally, it's up to your own, what you view it as. And I think that needs to be taken out of the rule. I think it needs to be clear cut. It needs to be cynical pull down. There's an awful lot of, side clause, there's a lot of asterisks to it. And I think that needs to be taken out. The debate has to be taken out. To me, yeah, it's a black card. I think, it is a cynical foul. There was a goal on. Nicky Quaid knew what he was doing. He took down Duggan. But then you can argue, was Duggan in possession? So here's one of these asterisks on the rule that needs to be removed in my view. I do analysis work, and to me, someone in possession either has the ball in their hand or it's on the end of your hurl. That's in possession. So yes, Duggan did play the ball and he played it ahead of himself, but I suppose technically he's not in possession of the ball. But I do think it was a black card. I don't think in any other way it can't be a black card. But the rule does need a big revamp, and this isn't the only game this year where we've seen problems with it. We need to remove the the debate on it. It has to be clear cut, and that's it.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there, Kieran. And I think, to be fair, Clare commentary, even Brian Lohan didn't want to really kind of dwell on it in post-game comments. But I mean, the irony thing here is Clare have been on the back end of some maybe questionable black card decisions. I'm thinking about Tipperary and Clare, particularly that penalty award down in the Gaelic grounds a few years ago. But again, I think Clare, if they were, had a player advantage here, certainly Colin Ryan certainly would have come on. Down to 14 players for pretty much the rest of the game. Might have kind of given a different slant on it. But I think definitely the rule book has to be kind of looked at, a clear and obvious goal scoring opportunity. And yeah, I think the hurling committee here have a big job, because I know we mentioned a few weeks ago, Kieran, about this infamous survey that went out. I think this is the big rule here in terms of the black card and defining what a black card actually is. So I think that is of immediate importance, I think, for everyone, intercounty management, players and fans alike, to kind of get that black card, because it is a good rule. It's a good innovative rule. It should be awarding the attacking side here. And to be fair to Tony Kelly, what a penalty. Puts Clare 6 points up and they're in the driving seat, you would have thought. But it's going to be an interesting side development, particularly in the off season, and wondering in the GA Congress, will there be any amendments made?
Look, I'm sure if I was a Clare fan, I'd be really, really aggrieved with the decision. And look, I suppose as fans, we're very quick to point that as this is the reason we've lost. But I think Clare have to look at the big picture here. They scored 1 point from play in the second half. They scored 1-3 in total.
Agreed.
Is that enough to win an All Ireland semi-final? No, it's not. So really, really good first half. But in ways, all that good work they did in the first half was wiped out a little bit on the scoreboard, especially in the second half. I think they were very one-dimensional in their puckouts. Going long on top of Duggan every time. Yes, he's an unbelievable ball winner. But when you know where the ball is going, it's very easy to defend it, or it makes it easier to defend it. I think Limerick really got to grips with Clare's puckout. The fact you score 1 point from play in 35 minutes of hurling in an All-Ireland semi-final, Clare can be aggrieved, and I understand that, and they are right to be aggrieved with the decision. But the bigger picture is they scored 1-3 in a second half of an All-Ireland semi-final. We're talking about Cork, last year's All-Ireland final and the semi-final on Saturday, where we're saying they didn't perform and they scored 5 points. Clare, I think, worked a lot harder, but on the scoreboard, they also didn't perform. And I suppose in that left Limerick in the game, really. There was a 5 point cushion at half time. At 57 minutes, it's up to 6 points. Limerick had got it back. Limerick had got it back to a point at one stage before the penalty. 6 points in it now. And to not score from then home, you have to tack onto that scoreboard. When you have a 6 point gap in hurling, you have to keep the scoreboard ticking. And I think that for me would be the point that Clare should look at. Yes, the decision is wrong. And as a Limerick supporter, I think it should have been a black card. But there is, you can see the referee's interpretation of it as well. But that interpretation, player or referee, that needs to be taken out of it. It has to be clear cut. Technically, Peter Duggan wasn't in possession of a ball. So you could argue that it wasn't a black card. But for me, that needs to be taken away. I've said it, that it has to be more. We can't have decisions like this. It's the second biggest day of the year. It's an All-Ireland semi-final. And it could be the win and losing of a game. I think there's more factors on a Clare point of view. But that could be the deciding factor of a game. And, these decisions have to be right. When we're making these big calls, they have to be right.
And look, going back to Clare as well, the white count did actually accelerate a bit, particularly in that fourth quarter after Tony Kelly. I think, unfortunately, Mark Rogers, and particularly some frees, didn't go over. David Fitzgerald had 1 or 2 chances that blazed wide. Shane O'Donnell as well uncharacteristically put one wide that looked a good scoring opportunity. So they were letting Limerick back in it. But I thought significantly here for Limerick, it was Conor Cleary. He was already been booked. And then there was a subsequent foul. He had to then be taken off. But from a Limerick perspective, you talked about bottle and leadership, but I thought Gearóid Hegarty, particularly down the stretch here, was a man on a mission and just literally pulled the Limerick team with him to get it over the line. I mean, I lost count of the number of possessions here, Kieran, with Gearóid Hegarty. Now, he didn't score, but he was seen to be the prominent primary ball winner for Limerick, and the setup and bringing players around him was completely and hugely pivotal to this comeback win.
Probably had a quiet first half on his own, on his own standards, but that second half he was incredible. We're talking about Cork needing leadership. That is what Gearóid Hegarty did in that second half, is grabbing the game by the scruff of the neck single-handedly in my eyes. And the amount of ball he won, he had Cleary was under huge pressure on him. I think Kieran Galvin came on as well and was struggling as well. But really when the backs were to the wall, Hegarty, to be fair, but he was phenomenal. I think as well, Cian Lynch, I mentioned earlier coming on, really, really turned the game. Look, we're talking Cian Lynch, he's a star player, but just his composure on the ball, winning puck outs. I suppose he caught that puck out that led to the Aidan O'Connor goal. He always just seems to, time seems to freeze when Cian Lynch has the ball in his hand. He always seems to delay the pass just an extra second or two, and then it's the perfect pass. He's opened up space. Phenomenal player. Hopefully he'll come through that game okay, and is okay for 2 weeks' time or next week by now. But with Hegarty, as you said, not to score and be man of the match, I suppose it shows the work he got through. We have, look, on the other side of it, we have players I think that are, I won't say underperforming, but I suppose maybe flattering a little bit to deceive. I suppose when come back on standards, but Gillane has been probably having, since he's had that 2 week break or that 2 week game, he missed 2 games with injury. Since that, I think he's struggled to get back up to that form. He was electric in the league and before the injury, really, really good. I think Shane O'Brien as well, to me, they seem to be making the same runs. And there's one stage in the game where Shane O'Brien got a ball and Gillane was in front of him and he was nearly blocking Shane O'Brien's space. So I think there's a little bit of a cohesion problem with the two of them. I think when you look back at years gone by, Seamus Flanagan, okay, he might have contributed massively in the scoreboard, but the work he got through and the dummy runs he was making for Gillane was probably never got the credit he deserved for it, really. He was putting up 10, 11K in games just on the runs he was making. And I think this is maybe where Limerick are falling down a little bit in the full forward line. We haven't been scoring heavy in the last couple of games, or we've got, the other day between Shane O'Brien and Gillane, 2 points. I think looking into a Galway game, that needs to improve. For me, I've been saying it for the last couple of weeks. I think Aidan O'Connor is a different player in the full forward line. You saw it the other day when he went in, he got that goal. He's dangerous in there. Is he an option? I'd like to see him tried in there. Cathal O'Neill, I suppose, picked up a bit of a knock against Cork. Thought he had a really good game as well. Peter Casey, another player that could be played in the full forward line, deadly accurate when he takes shots of goal. Is there a little bit of an ace up Kylie and Killark sleeve? Could they make a big change coming into the game? Because that full forward line isn't, the output isn't there. What should be there? Does one of them get dropped? So there's an awful lot of question marks still in that Limerick team, but you'd be hoping for the occasion that the performance level from both of them will rise. But I do think, just looking at them, they kind of a little bit of cohesion problem there.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, Kieran. It definitely magnified itself on Sunday. I would think there was a passage of play there where Shane O'Brien got the ball, and I think he was looking for Gillane, but Gillane was only about 1-2 yards away from him, and he overcarried. So there is a clear cohesion issue. It'll be very interesting to see. I'd imagine Aidan O'Connor will be slotted into the full forward line at some point in the All Ireland hurling final. I mean, to be fair to the guy, scoring the 12 points on Sunday, I was critical of his free taking in the Munster final. He was lights out, deadly accurate, and kept Limerick in the game. And I think the positive thing here for Limerick, the young guns, I challenged the young guns to really impress. And as you say, that pivotal game-winning goal here, you can look at the setup, like Cian Lynch, magnificent catch, the interplay, Tom Morrissey to Adam English. The vision from Adam English to then identify Aidan O'Connor in space, for the two young guns to basically combine for that game-winning goal, really does kind of set Limerick up in good stead. I mean, it'll do Aidan O'Connor and Adam English's confidence no world of good, really.
Absolutely, yeah. Look, we've been prodding these young lads all year. I think that Aidan O'Connor had an unbelievable league. I think he's maybe a little bit of a dip early into championship, but that day in Cork was a tough day. Like the weather conditions did not make it easy for free taking. There was a swirling breeze and that like a heavy mist falling. So but the other day, really really accurate. I suppose we have to remember these are young players. They're probably still learning their trade as such, but we you look at it, the reliance I suppose the reliance on the younger players that the team have put on them this year. They've been huge in a lot of games, and I suppose young blood was needed. And I suppose Limerick were in a lucky position that to have the likes of Aidan O'Connor and Colin O'Neill coming. I suppose we're looking at a minor team that won All Ireland 2 weeks ago, and you'll be looking at a few players and hoping one or two of them will make the jump up as well in time to come. But like you do need young blood, at least one or two, I would think, coming every year. Limerick don't seem to rush these young players. They seem to give them time and get the experience up. Good to see, it was a Hugh Flanagan coming on as well. I suppose new players to it because, that is what's needed. And it is a 70-minute game and it's a 23-man game. And, I suppose to me, it's the young and old, we're not relying on the same figures the whole time. And it's needed. The young blood and the legs is needed. And, to be fair, they've all been very, very good this year.
Yeah, and look, I think the bench impact, I think, Kieran, you've alluded to it here. I thought it was massive for Limerick. You look at the players that did come in. Obviously, Mike Casey did a job to close it out in the full back line, replaced Dan Morrissey. You also had subtle changes here. I thought David Reedy coming on really did provide an awful lot of much-needed energy inside in that middle third, particularly when he came on. He was pivotal, winning that free to give it a 2-point advantage. Keane Lynch, obviously. You could go on and on and on here in terms of the players. Even Fintan Fitzgerald came on. Every one of them basically created the work rate and, the composure at the end, Kieran, as well, I think has to be in good stead here. While Clare panicked in shot selection down the stretch, as you've said, the Tony Kelly goal was the last score that Clare scored in the game with 19 minutes to go. Limerick systematically really started to dismantle Clare point by point, culminating the goal. But even the lead up to that, David Reedy winning the free, Clare in the better position and really looking for Clare to make that mistake, to concede that free. And I thought it was just a composure at the end to close it out was very impressive from Limerick. On a day where myself and you, Kieran, have been in Croke Park before and would have seen the warning signs of Limerick struggling with 40 minutes gone, I think this transformation from Limerick is just... This team has basically etched itself in here as one of the greatest sides in any era, really, to be fair. Just given that kind of composure at the end, they faced adversity heads up, and again, they're coming into another All Ireland final, which is a magnificent achievement.
Absolutely, Mark. Look, we've talked before. We dreamed of winning one All Ireland, and I suppose to look back at, when we do look back, it will all end at some stage. I suppose we look at Kilkenny and. We thought they were going to keep winning forever, but it does always end. It's been a phenomenal couple of years. John Kiley's record as is now is 17 final wins from 18. Hopefully he can make that 18 from 19. They've given us some great days, and I suppose look, it's the attitude really that has to be admired, and that it should never give up, never beaten. Even you look back. That Munster final against Tipperary in Cork a couple of years ago, it was 10-12 points down at half time. Got that lead back and won the game. And, other teams at that stage throw the towel in, but they just have I suppose, and probably, Caroline Curd is a name that's mentioned a lot. I suppose no other county, I wouldn't know the psychologist or any other county because it's never mentioned. They're in the background, they're part of the management team, but Caroline Curd is a name that's mentioned an awful lot. And obviously the work she does and, that she gets them into that mindset that, you never give up, keep working. And I suppose they have, every player on different interviews has mentioned the process and stick to the process. And I genuinely do believe that they they believe in the process, whatever that is. They believe and they trust what Kylie and Connacht are doing, and it looks like still after the bones of 9 years that they're probably still as tight a bunch now than they were, back in 18 or 20 or 21 when they did win All Ireland's. They seem to be really tight knit group, and I think that's probably the main ingredient to the success they've had.
Yeah, no, absolutely agree, Kieran. And I think even Tom Morrissey kind of alluded to it as well in post game comments and even preview pieces. The appreciation of getting back to an All Ireland final after the 3-year gap is quite significant, and I think this team will embrace that. They'll enjoy the occasion. They will enjoy coming to Croke Park the last weekend of intercounty action to be still in the big dance. And look, to be fair to Limerick, 47% shot percentage, not going to get it done in an All Ireland hurling final, but I would be hopeful here, Kieran, that Limerick have received a massive stern test off Clare, have come through it, and they will improve. Look, if you equate it, I think it was 18 wides. You're hovering at the top end of the top level of 30 points here if they can get things right. And look, I think there's scope for improvement for Limerick. I think Limerick would be the first ones to acknowledge that the process, everything was good up until that final shot selection or that final pass. So look, I think for Limerick, they'll dust themselves down, they'll regroup, they'll learn a few lessons, particularly what Clare posted them, particularly in the back line. But I think it was just literally the never say die attitude here. They'll know they'll get a tough test from Galway as well, particularly with the league fixture in Gaelic grounds at the start of the year. Galway did impress me that night as well. So Limerick will be under no illusions, but it's going to be performance focused here from Limerick, certainly, Kieran. And look, if the top guns can deliver early, like Limerick could be on for an absolute incredible afternoon on Sunday.
It is probably, you mentioned earlier, roles reversed on 18. The Galway are now the young guns, and I suppose Limerick are the team with the experience, or the team that have been around a good few years. I suppose, look, Galway will pose, I suppose, challenges that the Limerick mightn't have faced before. They're playing to a system that's kind of, I suppose, in ways very defensive. It's going to be, I suppose, a different challenge. But like the likes of the performance analysis, I'm sure will be looking through every game that they've played this year and trying to find little nuggets of where they can go at them. I suppose for me, I think the 2-week period is maybe a little bit short just for the run-in. I suppose if any lad has a niggle or is putting huge pressure on them to be ready for July 19th, I think there should be room in the calendar for maybe a 3-week break between the semi-finals and the final. And I suppose it helps build up the hype and get people looking forward to it. I suppose the one thing I still not a big fan of is the split season, and I think so hurling is a sport for dry ground, and I suppose we're in our summer now, but for it all to be over on July 19th, okay, clubs will start, and clubs have started already in certain counties, but I think that it's an awful long time from July the 19th until second or third week in January when the National League starts again, where there's no inter-county hurling. That's obviously a discussion for another day. But just going back to Limerick, I think they're very metric driven overall. So the fact that the 40% shot efficiency will hurt. They strive for, I think their target is up around 70. Limerick will create a high number of chances. On days they will create upwards of 40 to 50 shots a goal. So that shot efficiency needs to be up for me over 60% to be anywhere close to win our Ireland final. But there will be, look, it's exciting time for Limerick Sport. Like 3 years since we've been in Croke Park and All Ireland final day. Really looking forward to it. And I suppose from our point of view, we just hope we come out on the right side. But I'm not looking ahead of this Galway challenge. I think Galway will be coming in with no fear because they have scaled an awful amount of steps in this ladder in a very, very short time this year. They have impressed. We've talked about Galway early in the Leinster Championship and impressing. Yeah, there was blips against the likes of Offaly, but I'd read over them because it's no disrespect to Offaly. It's a game where they're going in, they have a job to do, and all they wanted at the end was the 2 points, and they got the 2 points. They got the job done. it's rising up for the big games, and they did that to beat Kilkenny in the round robin, and to beat them again. Dublin beat them in the round robin, but to turn around in a couple of weeks later and to destroy them, really destroy Dublin in a Leinster final. Um, Cork, obviously, most people's favourite for the All Ireland this year, and to dismantle them in the manner they did in the second half. I suppose time will tell whether Galway were really, really good and Cork were bad, or if it was just Galway and their performance they brought. There is still a little bit of an unknown with Galway for me, but I'm sure they're relishing this challenge and will be going up to, you look at the likes of Rabbit, and he was playing in a school's final 2 years ago there and now he's in an Ireland final with his county. These lads are going to have no fear, and they have got the blend right. We've talked about it during the year. The mix with the older guys and the young guys, they do seem to have a good blend there. I would worry about Dahi Burke. He did look like he was carrying that. I think Joe Canning mentioned it in the pre-match talk where he said he's couple of weeks into the semi-final weren't ideal, so a big 2 weeks for him to try and get right. But these will be the talk points over the next week, and really excited and looking forward to it.
Absolutely, excitement is starting to build here in Galway, and I would imagine the same down in Limerick. I think there's a healthy rivalry between the two counties here as well. And look, Micheál O'Donoghue and his backroom staff have done it before in 2017, so it's not as if they're not coming in with any experience to the final. They know what it takes, particularly management, and also you have certain players there, like the Conor Coonies, that have been there in Conor Whelan. So, look, it's going to be fascinating. We'll have the preview next week, Kieran, for sure. But this was great. Many thanks for your time tonight, Kieran. I suppose next week it all hones in on the biggest day in the intercounty hurling calendar, the All Ireland hurling final between Limerick and Galway. So we'll get Kieran's opinions on the big game. Also, we'll look to pull in a few special guests as well. Until then, Kieran, enjoy the weekend, enjoy the sunshine, and we'll chat next week.
Cheers, Mark.
Thank you for listening to this podcast episode. If you liked what you heard in this podcast, why not subscribe to the Hawkeye Sidekick podcast on either Amazon, Spotify, YouTube, or Twitter platforms. You can also follow me at Hawkeye Sidekick on Facebook and Twitter for the latest sporting opinions, articles, and reports.